Point where, fighting games became a thing later on, and you'd literally go up and put your quarter next in line and try and take down that one kid who's kicking everybody's butt as Chun-Li.
There was a time period where kids in arcade games who could rule, like at Chuck E. Cheese or at the mall arcade or at the, in my case, a lot of time, the bowling center, people would crowd around you if you were owning a game.
A global society was born. A society that now not only plays and connects online, but has produced lifelong friendships, thriving communities, even marriages. And this community doesn't just exist for entertainment's sake. Gamers are not only one of the most connected and vocal groups, they're some of the most loyal. Friendships forged within a game experience somehow yield a bond that isn't easily broken.
One of the things that is really exciting about games in general is that they've evolved far beyond the local community aspect of being able to, just play the game or enjoy your game with some of your local friends, whatnot, into truly global experiences where you can share your passion with people all around the world.
I love the connectivity. I have lifelong friends that I've met online, and we started out just playing together and then ended up meeting up for competitions or just meeting to go hang out and kind of actually meet each other in person. And it sounds silly, but a lot of those friendships are really solidified around that joint experience that you have while you're playing a game. And I think that's something special, right? It's something magical.
That's something I saw working, kind of the internet industry all through the 90s and the early aughts, was people who would meet other people online and become really enamored of them, and sometimes like move to another city to try living with this person, or people would get married or meet that way. And that's a whole new kind of human relationship that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. It's like a new thing. People can meet and fall in love and not have ever met in the real world.
I can't tell you how many stories we've gotten of people being, hookups because of it, and people eventually getting married because of the game. People that have gone through, some sort of horrible medical condition that they've had to deal with, and the game's kind of let them work through that.
I see that, deaths of key characters really affected people and made them cry in the game, or they got tattoos of the, logo of the game on their bodies, or a man and his wife met on Xbox Live playing the game, and now they play co-op every night.
There are kids out there who exist now because their parents met in World of Warcraft, video games have changed the course of human evolution to some degree, and created whole new mating rituals and ways of social interaction that didn't exist, and that's as a result of the internet and video games. So it's going to be interesting to watch all of that evolve. Video games are going to get more and more real and connect more and more people around the world.
I used to play EverQuest quite a lot, as many EverQuest players did. A guy that I met in South Korea, PvPing, we became friends. I ended up going to his wedding 10 years later. We're family friends now. And it's phenomenal because we had this shared passion for games. We had a lot of similar values and ideas, and we had a lot of great shared experiences online where we really formed a deep bond and true friendship, and has blossomed into a great, long-lasting friendship in the real world.
I saw someone recently speaking about a boy whose parents were killed in a car accident, so he was left alone in the world, and without video games to sort of fall back into, he'd be sitting in his room depressed out of his mind, and his video game world and all his friends in his video game world really supported him through that really painful time. And the guy who was observing this was basically saying, you guys don't really understand it, because I know you hear this all the time, that violent video games are the problem in the world, etc., etc. But the games are so meaningful to people, and they're such, the friends that they build around it, and the sort of the creativity and the immersion and everything else that comes with it is actually very valuable, and it's something you learn a lot from.
I walked into the stairwell here, and this shooting, I can't even really describe it, but I basically fell down the stairs because I had a stroke, as they later revealed to me. I ended up in the hospital for about 9-10 days, and you're really scared, and you really don't know where to I mean, then you're like sad, and you have all this anger, and you don't know where to aim it. And my friends started bringing stuff up to me, and at first it was food, and then they started bringing ways to play games up. I got a little Nintendo DS, and I was playing Zelda on that, and I had a laptop, and I was playing. I mean, I had Steam on there, and I had just TF2 and Left 4 Dead and Borderlands, and and that really was the turning point at the hospital, where I wasn't as scared, I guess, anymore. I wasn't as mad. I had something to do. Because part of the stroke that was awful was I went blind out of my right eye, and it's sort of crazy how not just the games in the hospital that really got me through it. It's been everyone around me in this industry, like in all different companies in all different states. So yeah, in a very literal way, I think video games really did kind of save my life.
The world is now engulfed in an artistic, social, and technological revolution like never before. Interactive entertainment is the ultimate expression and delivery format, but who will determine what stories are told and how we will experience them in the future? The answer is simple. Children have a limitless capacity for wonder, imagination, and creativity. And they aren't afraid to fail.
When I learned history in school, it was the most boring. It was old books with black and white images in them. And I saw a girl in a video recently from Carnegie Mellon that was talking about trebuchets, which is this old medieval siege weapon. But she had actually experienced using one because, of course, she'd done it in a virtual world. And to have, I think she was 6, so have a 6-year-old girl telling you her opinion of medieval siege weapons versus my version of it, which was so incredibly boring, is a fundamental change to education through entertainment that can make history and things like that much more engrossing.
My kid, he is 12, and he is faster at things that I'm not as fast at. He is better at things, and it's because while his mind was developing, he had access to interactive media that was much more advanced than the interactive media that I had, and the interactive media that I had was the first time. My parents didn't have any interactive media when their brains were developing.
Video games, I think, they provide a space for learning how to fail safely and successfully. I think as a culture, we have a real obsession with always getting things right. We're afraid of failing. But video games provide us this very safe space to learn how to problem solve, to think through an issue that we can't quite get right, to help us realize that it's okay to fall on our face occasionally if we learn from that and we eventually can succeed.
Because it's simulation, we can do things and experience things and practice things and test things that either aren't feasible or aren't safe in real life, in the real world.
Despite the mainstream acceptance of video games in the 80s and early 90s, by the late 90s, the term gamer still seemed to be a close cousin to geek or nerd. If you were a serious, dedicated gamer, you were seen as part of a strange subculture. But the winds of change were blowing, and this perception would soon shift. Being a gamer would soon be in vogue.
I can feel it burn. We're taking over. We're taking over. Now I try to lead them. Will they ever learn? We're taking over. We're taking over. Every time I breathe in, I can feel it burn. We're taking over. We're taking over. Now I try to lead them. Will they ever learn? We're taking over. We're taking over. Hands up in the sky, let me hear you say. Every time I breathe in, I can feel it burn. We're taking over. We're taking over.
It's a borderline religious experience to stand in the middle of a esports stadium packed full of tens of thousands of players cheering for their favorite teams. It's just awesome to see because it's easy to doubt that that type of passion would actually manifest in a physical environment, that people would pay hundreds of dollars or travel thousands of miles to come to these events to watch people play video games, and they do, and they love it.
I've always been kind of frustrated by the perception of video game nerdiness and things like that. From my career making games that feel like summer blockbusters and don't feel like, D&D basement games, to having the courage to put myself out there on camera and put on a clean shirt and kind of change that perception as well, to just evangelizing games overall, and to also evangelize the career. And so over the course of my 20+ year career in this business, I've always hoped that there's some kids out there who see a football player or astronaut, and they're like, yeah, that's awesome, but maybe video games, maybe that's where I want to be.
And there are a lot of people who message me or send me emails, and they are just miserable because they're super lonely. They haven't found their friend group, And I think that's sort of like my mission, is to connect people and make people happy and give people friends, because I never had that growing up. I never had my nerd group.
I think that's how communities have really started up, is just being able to find people with similar interests. When you're a kid, it's really only like if your next door neighbor played. But now we're all adults and have the ability to reach out and connect with someone else.
It's clearly a culture where everybody's having fun. Everybody's got a smile on their face. They're living their life in a very, very, powerful way.
The old way of sort of, computers are for geeks and stuff, and video games are for geeks, has died, is dead. No one doesn't have Facebook. Angry Birds, people almost don't even think of that as a video game. People don't think of, become this blur of like, what is a video game and what isn't. Is Facebook a video game? I kind of think it is. I mean, it's interactive like a video game, and you can do stuff on it.
The world's really different now. And I think it's because those of us that grew up being ostracized and looked down upon and treated like we were radioactive by mainstream culture created our own culture, and we took the things that we loved. We took the video games, and we took the technology, and we took the engineering, and we built our own world out of those things. And that world is so awesome that the mainstream culture that made fun of us when we were kids for loving this culture that's so awesome could not deny it and could not help but be seduced by it.
We're celebrating Video Game Week starting today.
From Studio 6B in Rockefeller Center, the National Broadcasting Company presents Late Night with Jimmy Fallon.
Look at it, looks slick, come on.
Well, it's the most powerful video game console ever made. We were targeting about 10 times the performance of any previous
10 times?
system. Yeah, 10
Really?
times. Yeah.
I didn't think you can get better than PS3, but you can 10 times, I guess.
We're gonna play this together. So this is Super Mario
so excited about
3D
this.
World.
Yeah. That's my man. I love Mario. I broke a sweat on that video game. Ladies and gentlemen, here's a professional actor reading the line, "It's a me, Mario," in a very dramatic way.
It's a me, Mario.
Hey, Conan O'Brien here. Once again, I know absolutely nothing about video games, which is why I've decided to review them.
Take a girl for a ride.
Oh my God. I've never licked a remote before. I look like John Tesh after he's been dead a year. What did you just say?
I hate tombs.
Yeah, guess what? Then don't be a Tomb Raider! I'm sorry. I meant to compliment her and I almost kicked her.
In the late 90s, with realism in games reaching new levels and more visceral, action-packed fare appearing on game shelves, a new conversation started. Violence.
The world of home video games isn't holding back the violence. Mortal Kombat, 2 of the bloodiest games to date, were released yesterday.
This game encourages players to shoot this gun, which is called a justifier.
Kids who play video games too often are more likely to be violent
That's the finding of a new study out of Japan's Tohaku University.
There was no rating on this game at all when the game was introduced.
Have a great deal of information that is racist, sexist, and promotes models of violence.
Recommendations on guns after that series of meetings, and as you mentioned, the latest with video game makers who said, don't blame us.
There's always a lot of media talking about violence in video games. And certainly there are violent video games, but that's not how you describe the medium of gaming.
If I were to go to the cinema and I were to just watch Saw movies, and I came away and you asked me what I felt about the cinema, I would say it was the most disgusting, violent, gratuitous thing. And that's what the media has done, is focused on a few titles, and that has ended up in consumers' minds defining what this industry is.
It's weird how when you watch the people, you know, they go to Congress and they're angry, you know, our kids are being corrupted. I'm like, yeah, exactly, your kids. You should be not corrupting them. I leave them alone 10 hours a day. It's like finding your dad's Playboys under the bed and then blaming Playboy.
You know, we're just like any other industry that we have these rating systems in place, and there's going to be something for everybody.
We put measures in place, ESRB, our guidelines. We make sure that we build our game to the rating. It gets checked on a regular basis.
The interesting thing, I think, with games is that we actually have an even better rating system than movies, but there's still kind of this general misunderstanding with the elder generation that somehow all games are like Grand Theft Auto.
People like to make just kind of a causal link and say video games cause violence. And it's like, well, let's see. So there's more crime in the summer and more ice cream is sold in the summer. Therefore, ice cream causes crime. That's not how legitimate scientific research works.
Violence, unfortunately, is a part of human nature. And last time I checked, Cain didn't bludgeon Abel with a Game Boy. Genghis Khan didn't have an Xbox Live account. And, you know, Hitler didn't play Crash Bandicoot.
We have unfortunately had a lot of gun crime in the United States recently. And I remember someone tweeted after one of the most recent incidences when people started accusing video games of being an influence for this, they were like, wow, I wonder how all those other countries with the same exact video games as us don't have as much gun crime.
You know, it'd be like saying, we don't want anyone to go watch movies because all movies are violent. But people don't say that because, you know, everyone really understands movies as a medium.
I don't believe that video games are murder simulators. If anything, what the statistics prove is that it's exactly the opposite.
We've survived a lot of things as gamers for a really long time. We've survived Congress, we've survived busybody parents, we've survived religious-based hysteria.
You realize that it's about imagination and invention and a connection to a world, and it doesn't have these big trappings that people apply to them. So I think it's a problem that's just going to naturally evolve away, and we just have to defend the industry until that evolution happens.
The campfire. We've all been there, whether an actual campfire or just listening to someone tell a great story. As humans, we've always had the ability and desire to suspend our disbelief. If only for a few minutes a day, we want to escape from the treadmill of life and give it up, to be immersed in something outside ourselves.
We have this opportunity to be storytellers, to be able to give the consumer the opportunity to lose themselves in a world for as long or as little as they want. We have the realities of life every day, whether it's the economy or whether it's getting by or whether it's a job and earning money. But we have a medium that we can lose ourselves in.
Day-to-day life isn't always that exciting. And if at the end of the day you can turn on a tablet, a PC, a console, and just kind of escape into another world, I think it's a wonderful thing that essentially allows you to kind of live the dream.
The storytelling in games is just as good as movies. It's just as good as reading a book.
With the resurrection and renaissance of the industry coming into the 90s and early 2000s, games began another evolutionary step forward: story. This fundamentally changed the audience's expectations of what a good game really was and raised the bar for game designers everywhere.
Storytelling in games is a tricky beast to tame. As game makers, we have to set up rules. We have to set up universes that make sense and have their own sense of logic. And once we've established what that logic is, then we let the player's mind and imagination solve problems and work their way through those worlds.
I think one of the things we've really learned over the last maybe decade is ways to tell stories without a cutscene, without stopping the interactivity, to have the story be something that emerges from the play itself.
Video games are a lean-forward experience, whereas film and television are a lean-back experience. You're driving every moment of the game. A friend of mine a while back actually compared games to novels, and the fact that if you stop reading, the novel doesn't keep going, and video games are very much the same.
Telling a story in video games can be a lot more difficult, because then you have to anticipate the actions of the player. Whereas in a movie, you decide what both characters say, and then you write it down, and that's what they say.
Storytelling in games is an interesting problem right now because we don't fully understand it. The movie industry has been around for 100 years or whatever, and they have a really good idea of what it means to tell story in that kind of visual medium. And the game industry doesn't have all those rules yet.
Either reading a book or watching a movie, it's completely passive. You're letting the storyteller give you their vision of their world or whatever story they want to tell you, and you're listening to it. It's unfolding for you. You're not affecting that. With a game, the journey is the reward more than, say, the ending or the payoff.
This is our routine. Day and night, all we do is survive. It never lets up.
The idea of spontaneity within storytelling is something that's unique to video games. You can't just change how a song sounds midway through it. You can't just change the end of a book while you're reading it. But in certain games, your decisions have a direct outcome on the ultimate fate of characters. And that's unique and sweet, and I think that's what people respond to.
Can you imagine if you were redoing Star Wars and you get to Empire Strikes Back and Vader says, "Join me," and you, as Luke Skywalker, go, "Okay." And then the rest of the movie and all of Jedi are completely different because you made that choice. And that is where I think video games fundamentally and vastly differ from every other kind of nerd media that I love.
Who lives? Who dies?
I get it. We're meant to choose.
Time.
Guns down. You don't have to get involved.
We must choose.
If you insist, I do not see how I could save the lives of other people.
I also lost someone I loved.
Whether the classic Arthurian legends or more modern translations, one thing humanity has never had a problem with is the willing suspension of our disbelief. The earliest storytellers saw the primal power in writing, reading, and telling stories, true or fictional.
I think that once you show a player what a world looks like and how a world functions, they get into the world and then that is their reality. And so I think as modern game makers, we have to keep remembering that the suspension of disbelief comes from the creation of a universe and the creation of a world, and an immersive world that has rules that are predictable and that are logical, and not from the visual eye candy that we get, with all this horsepower.
And now that we have these consoles that deliver mind-blowing graphics and beautiful explosions and immersive worlds, there's something more to it. We've taken our inspirations from outside of games with emotion and character development and storytelling in a way that we've tried to break new ground, that you have an association and an attachment with a character in a game that makes you want to feel for that story, makes you want to feel like you're there making the decisions all along the way.
Good storytelling is not just entertainment. Good stories can help us grow. They can teach us about the past and challenge us to aspire to greater and higher things. The story experience in a video game is no different. The campfire is just a bit brighter and more colorful.
So many things have to perfectly sync up for it to work. You have art, you have writing, you have music, you have backgrounds, you have timing, you have the voice actors, you have acting. And then video games, you have everything on top of that. It has to be an engaging user experience as well. So I think a good video game, I think, is probably the hardest thing to make.
If you want emotion, you need the human face. And in the world of film, that is the cheapest thing that you can get. You point a camera at somebody and you have it instantly. But in the world of games, you have a multi-million investment in technology before you see anything that looks like a human face.
I think the most exciting part about this industry is that we're constantly inventing and being fearless about that challenge of invention. And invention's difficult because if you already knew what it was going to be, you wouldn't be inventing it. It would already exist, right? So whenever we invent, whether it's a design idea or a stylistic thing or something related to the story, we kind of depend upon this trust that there will be inspiration, that there will be revelation.
Then you got to get in and start prototyping stuff. So you build a bunch of prototypes and you start trying to understand, hey, are the ideas we had really fun once you put them into an interactive environment?
I think at the alpha stage, hopefully we'll see the fun. It's pins and needles time because it's that awkward teenage years that, you've got could be an awesome experience. It could really come together nicely. Everyone's really enthusiastic because there's something there to play from beginning to end. But there are some weird elements to it, and you've just had a bunch of people come through and point out all your awkwardness, your buck teeth, and your crazy-looking eyebrow, and all that stuff, and you're sort of hoping that, okay, I see that, I understand it. Now I need to kind of go back and fix those things a little bit, make myself a little prettier, get back out on the street, and show myself off again.
You start layering on all the really rich assets, things like a great story, the high-fidelity art, the fully detailed characters. And once you start marrying this super high production quality with those original bare-bones prototypes of your design ideas, you can start really bringing the product together.
And then the work to go from alpha to beta is, generally speaking, a laundry list of things that we have to check off and make sure are working properly. We don't touch those as much at alpha, but they certainly are on our minds at that point as we start to kind of polish up the game, make those adjustments to the gameplay, really try to hone down on what's working well and maybe give it some more resources and time to develop and sort of put aside those things that aren't working as well.
One of the big revolutions we had in the 1990s was we started bringing in people to play our games and watch them play. That's it. But it transformed the way that we make games. I mean, up until that point, we'd pretty much been making the games for ourselves. And so if we thought it was fun, we were done.
You sort of had to make a game and then do, you know, kind of one of these. Did it feel right? You know, you'd have your QA department, but you know, they were paid employees, so you never know if you're getting the best feedback. But now we have this beta testing and ability to talk with the fans. And if you're utilizing that correctly, it's really powerful.
So you hand this, what you think is the gold master, off to the first party, in the console world anyway. On the PC side, it's definitely still more of a Wild West. But there's a lot of backlash, certainly if you can't deliver quality, or you have lots of bugs in a PC product. So you hand it off to Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And usually it's, you know, a 10-day waiting game. And, you know, it's always the most nerve-wracking time is that, okay, is this gonna make it through? And so, you know, we get that call maybe, or email, you know, maybe 10 days later or so, and, you know, it's, hey, looks good, celebration ensues, or you've got these, you know, critical issues and these minor issues, and you need to fix, you know, the critical issues and as many minor issues as you can and resubmit. And yeah, and then it hits the streets. People either love it or hate it. Most of the time, both. You get both ends, no matter how good your game is. And you sort of have to, you roll with the punches. You let people say their piece.
I look out today, things have changed beyond belief. Titles we saw 1,000 man-years of programming artwork and design work went into them. It's astonishing.
It's making a movie times 1,000. It is daunting. I don't know why I do it.
The evolution of great storytelling in video games couldn't have come at a better time. It seems as if the technology rose to the occasion at precisely the right moment. From the turn of the century to now, games have never looked better, felt better, or played better. Enter the next generation.
Are in the red, driving closer to the edge, up on Flagstaff Road. I still remember what you said. Are you living? Are you dead? You better let me know. Put on this place like a cinema, standing naked on the stage and I'm unashamed. It's so easy to be cynical. Let's turn around and start again. Let's get out tonight. You got the fire, I got the fire. In my young blood, let's fight up the dark. You got the fuel, I got the spark. In my young blood. In my young blood.
It's funny because every few years the industry really kind of reinvents itself, whether that's we figure out a new way to give that experience to players, or there's a new piece of hardware out there, or some new technology, some new interface. There's always that new challenge.
Right now is a really difficult time for the industry. We are in transition of consoles, and we are seeing a lot of the economic scorecards have come in about what games do and do not make money and which are the best to be doing.
Honestly, it's so hard to predict. I mean, no one would predict that the platforms that are most popular right now, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, no one would predict that that's what would be the norm now.
Every new console generation, we get more and more horsepower. And every console generation, there are people who say, is this enough?
Okay, oh, this is really awesome. And then 5 minutes later, wasn't that awesome. I need a new awesome thing, you know, because we're just so spoiled with it.
The medium has grown up a lot from the early days. I think part of it is that we finally have the technology to render characters in a believable way.
As we look as a studio how we're going to evolve our new IP and moving into this next phase, this next generation of consoles, we're having to think outside the box. We're having to look at how we set the foundation of a structure for the next 10 years.
I think at this point we're in a pretty interesting crossroads in the history of games. Publishers, especially in companies, are fairly risk-averse right now because everybody foresees a big change happening and nobody knows what it is.
I often compare indie developers and big, huge studios to a couple of guys in a Zodiac raft and an entirely fully loaded battleship. Each one has its own strengths, and I think where the indie guys literally and figuratively run circles around the big publishers is that they're a lot more mobile. They don't have to make as many complicated boardroom-based decisions. They can focus on the kind of game that they want to make, and because of things like Steam, they can take their game, make it awesome, and then get it directly to players who then spread the existence of their game because they love it so much that they're telling other people about it, they're sharing it on forums, they're giving it to their friend lists, and they don't really need to make that investment of ridiculous amounts of money on advertising and marketing.
The AAA games have beautiful graphics, big budgets, incredible art teams, but that's not always necessarily what makes a great game.
Really, whenever a platform has opened itself up to allow hobbyists to be able to create products, you get incredible amounts of innovation.
The interesting thing about that is when you get to a team of like 200 people, the ability to innovate is pretty much zero. You have to basically go with what was designed originally, and that's what the game becomes. The smaller the team, the more you can discover the really important flashes of lightning and flashes of insight that happen after large parts of the game are done. And then you're like, oh, you know, what would be really cool is in this section and that section, if we could do this. You know, and if you have a 200-person team, you can't pivot on a dime like that. You have to be like, well, that would be nice, but we don't have time, and we have to get done.
But I do think that there's like a revolution afoot in gaming where people are interested in finding those games that have more character and soul than what they've experienced before.
A large game developer might not be able to take big risks on a virtual reality title that only works in VR and really utilizes it. But in indie, they're driven by passion, by wanting to make the best game possible. They're usually not sitting there saying, how can I make something that really gives me a nice return on investment? And I think that that's going to become more and more important in the game space in the coming years.
Where do we go from here? Many think that when it comes to the next generation of the Campfire, the traditional game controller tied to a screen gameplay experience may have its limitations.
One of the things I'm most excited about is virtual reality. I think a lot of us can remember back in the early 90s when movies like The Lawnmower Man came out and VR was going to be the next big thing. And it never really was, because the headsets were big and clunky, the graphics were crappy. Well, thanks to recent advances in smartphone technology and screens and tracking devices, VR is set for a big comeback.
I didn't actually start out to create a virtual reality headset. I set out to buy a really nice one. So I tried buying all manner of different head mounts, and none of them was really what I wanted for playing video games immersively. And so I said, oh, shoot, well, it looks like I'm gonna have to actually try to make my own. And I actually found that it was something that there was a lot of technology that advanced over the last few years, and it was actually something that was finally possible to do.
How do you walk around in that virtual world? How do you physically move in a natural way beyond just sitting down and using keyboard and mouse? That's why we developed the Omni. It's an interface that allows you to walk and move freely and naturally in your favorite game.
But when you break it all down, I hope we never get rid of the kind of gaming where I just get to sit on a couch and push some buttons for a while.
Could those early pioneers, whose ideas eventually gave birth to an industry, have guessed what it one day would become? Would it be foreign to them? Or did they have a feeling from the beginning that the ideas and creativity of each generation of new designers and artists would forever reinvent the medium?
You know, back when we were working on games on the Atari 800, I think people would have laughed if you said, this is going to be a meaningful art form and it's going to be in the Smithsonian one day.
I never thought it would mount to anything. Nolan was running around saying, oh, it's going to be a big industry and we're going to sell millions of games and it's going to take over. And I fully expected that Atari was going to fail until the day Nolan and Joe came back from the visiting Warner. He informs us they want to pay this money for us, you know, like $20 million or $30 million. It was like, what?
The amazing thing for us, you know, back in the early days is we envisioned this. We really did look forward to a day where video games would be interactive movies, would look like interactive movies. And I mean, we are there.
The spirit of curiosity and invention that was there at the industry's creation is still its driving force. Today's game designers continue to give audiences new and fresh interpretations of classic stories. What began as a single pixel has now redefined what storytelling is for the 21st century and beyond.
The future of games inherently gets tied up into the future of technology in a lot of ways, and it's really hard to know beyond a couple years where technology is going to go.
We have a faster rate of invention than probably any medium before it.
I think video games in the next 30 to 40 years are going to be unimaginable, where you can't tell fantasy from reality and you can live the dream that you've always wanted to live.
We have a lot of really intelligent people becoming intelligent through the use of this stuff.
Video games, I feel like, are inching towards the holodeck, because that's the end goal, is to have to be as much like real life as possible.
Couldn't the whole world just be digitized and that make it an easier, safer, and better place? I could see us getting there and getting there quick. What is the ineffable sort of characteristics that make real life important? I think this is what video games are going to start challenging in the next 20 years.
The size and scope of the modern video game industry might well be far beyond the greatest expectations of the men who began it. But games will continue to be created as they always have, by drawing on history and culture, imagination and technology, to deliver stories and experiences that delight and challenge generations to come, whatever form the games may take.
I think that's why a lot of nerds play video games, because we have it pretty tough. We don't quite fit in, but in a game, we always fit in, always.
Even though I make them every day, even though I play broken games for years before they're perfect and we put them on a shelf, and you know, there's so many issues that go along with that, I still have the capability of being transported back to that little kid wrapped in a blanket, staying up way too late, sitting in front of a tiny television, obsessed. And I really, really want to give that to another 8-year-old kid and have him feel the same thing 30 years from now as well.
It's the same reason that kids play Cowboys and Indians when they're young, or you saw Star Wars. You wanted to be that. It's fantasy fulfillment, and being able to do fantasy fulfillment on the level of fully interactive worlds that you can explore and get lost in.
It was how to get my game to delight as many people as possible. And it's coming back to this fundamental thing that we do in the games industry, is delight people, is entertain people.
You know, I used to say to people, you know, someday everybody will be a gamer. And you know, that was like an aspirational thing. Now I can't even use that line anymore because because it's like, duh, well, everybody is.
There's something which we never expected, which was an assumption you'd have in the film industry to some degree, that you make a film and people could archive the film and see it decades or hundreds of years later. In the game industry, I never thought that would be the case. And seeing people who are still loving these old games means that they'll probably be surviving for decades to come in some form or another.
There are a lot of people that have dreams. I like to say everyone who has ever had a shower has had a good idea. It's the people who dry off and do something about them that makes the difference. I think the world is way too interesting to dwell on your past. And I'm proud of my participation in this industry. But I think that what is really more remarkable is how we can take all the things we've learned and push it yet one step further.
I gotta tell you, gotta tell you, gotta tell you, tell you. No one says you sounds good.
I can still remember some of the music.
I
think my favorite memory from playing video games was
when I first played Bonk's Adventures.
The one with the TIE Fighter and the one with the motorcycle things.
Burger Time. I loved Burger Time.